Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled Inside the Olympic Experience. I'm Chris Winter, and I'm the former national team athlete, now working with BC Athletics as their technical manager for track and field. And I'll be serving as today's panelist throughout this webinar. Just a quick intro and introduction and agenda for the day. I'll begin by introducing our coaching panel, which you should be able to see there in front of you. I'll begin by asking a series of questions to those panelists. That'll take us a look inside the Olympic experience, and that should then take us through to about 10 to 15 to 20 minutes at the end. That will leave some time for questions from the audience. Just some housekeeping. I'm sure you guys are all quite familiar with webinars by now, but just so you know, you've all been muted, but you are able to ask questions using the dialog box. And we'll try to answer as many of those questions as possible during the last 15 to 20 minutes of this webinar. If you're having any technical difficulties, just let us know. You can use that same dialog box. And in the background is Kyle Smith from Athletics Canada, who will do his best to try to assist. The webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted on the Athletics Canada website under Coaching Education e-learning, and you should be able to access that shortly after the webinar. Again, we're scheduled to last for about 60 minutes here, and we'll do our best to stick to that. Okay, I think we're ready to go. We'll begin by just introducing our panelists for today. First is Jeff Huntoon. Coach Huntoon has developed athletes to gold medal performances at the collegiate, world, and Olympic levels. He holds both a bachelor from University of Northern Colorado and a master's from West Virginia University. His degrees are in physical education and has used this to drive his daily coaching for over 30 years. He's a decorated university and federation coach and has traveled the world to discuss his programming and coaching techniques. Next is Hilary Stellingworth. Hilary is the new program leader, the head coach of the men's and women's cross country and track at the University of Victoria, after being the interim coach for 2019 and 2020 seasons and assistant coach for the years prior to that. Hilary was also a national team coach for the Pan Am Cross Country Championships in March 2020 and an apprentice coach for the Athletics Canada Western Hub based in Victoria, BC. Hilary is an accomplished national team athlete, a two-time Olympian in 2012 and 2016, and Olympic finalist in the women's 1500 meters, competing for Canada on 11 national teams, including a World Cross Country and a World Athletics Championships, Commonwealth Games, and Pan Am Games. She is also a former NCAA All-American at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Last is Glenroy Gilbert. He's a two-sport and five-time Olympian, competing in athletics at Seoul 1998, Barcelona 1992, Atlanta 1996, and Sydney 2000, as well as bobsled at Lillehammer in 1994. Upon his retirement from athletics in 2001, Glenroy began coaching and has coached several national team athletes to the World Championships and Olympic Games. He's been a part of the national team program since 2002, with a brief stint at the Canadian Paralympic Committee. Glenroy has coached 4 Olympic Games and 9 World Championships, and is presently the head coach of Athletics Canada. So with our theme here today is Inside the Olympic Experience, we'll begin by just asking a set of questions here. So we'll start with Glenroy and just have you, Glenroy, just describe the role of a team coach at the Olympic Games and taking through the number of experiences you've had that way.
Yeah, for me, obviously, my first national team as a coach, I actually was an apprentice coach with Molly Killingbeck and Alex Gardner at the time, I believe was our head coach. I came on board as an apprentice coach, so simply just really observing and following behind the lead of the coaches that were assigned to that team, basically doing whatever I was asked to do, but also observing the manner in which coaches are there on national teams to work with athletes. And again, I've had some great experience with a lot of the coaches that came before me, a lot of coaches that I still actually have a very good relationship with. But again, my role was really just to learn, and I've had a great experience just watching and understanding that the role of a coach, at least the way I saw it on a national team, and it pretty much guides the way I conduct myself today, which is really to be there and to be in a position to do whatever the athlete and coach needs you to do on the ground, which is to make that experience as positive and as result focused as you possibly can. Just really trying to remove any of the hurdles, any of the obstacles that are in the way of the athlete and coach on the day, to get the job done, which obviously in a lot of cases for us in our program is to, to get personal best, to get top 8 finishes, and of course, ultimately to get athletes on the podium at the major championships, world championships and Olympic Games.
That's great. And so with you have an interesting experience having both attended as an athlete and a coach. Can you describe just what that transition was like, especially as your first time moving into that coaching role, and just what you drew from your athlete experience to bring along to be into your coaching experience?
Yeah, obviously as an athlete, and I'm sure Hilary can certainly speak to that in some way, that when you're an athlete, you're certainly involved. You're 100% all about you and about what you need to do and about what you need. Whereas when you're a coach, I think you're there simply to make the athlete's experience the most promising in a sense, but really most conducive to performance, and trying everything you can to remove obstacles. I say that because my first team as a national team was the Olympic Games in 2004 in Athens, and I was on a team with Les Gramantic, Alec Gardner, Martin Goulet, some of the former head coaches of Athletics Canada. And a lot of these guys, what I did was really just, I followed them around. I watched what they were doing. I listened to conversations they were having with athletes and coaches. And I crafted my own approach from just watching and learning when to speak and when not to speak, and just enjoying how coaches that have had a long history in the sport of track and field, how they deal with athletes at a national level, at an international level, at Olympics and World Championships. So a lot of what I do today and the way I've kind of formed my coaching approach is really based on what I've learned from the coaches that came before me, and which is really one to, again, avoid as much selfishness as you possibly can, and you recognize that the athletes and coaches are under stress. So what can you do to make that experience as easy as possible for them?
That's great. Over to you, Jeff, and just talk a little bit about your experience coaching at the Olympic Games. I know you've had a range of experiences that way, so maybe kind of go into some details there.
Yeah, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be a part of this, and great experience to get back talking coaching after being locked down and just kind of hanging out for so many days and weeks. Yeah, I've had pleasure throughout my coaching career of doing it, being a part of the Olympics every different way. Watching on TV growing up and dreaming about it and trying to ascend to that level that the other two have got to. I never quite got there, but to be able to get into coaching, and really fortunate, my first couple years out, had a couple athletes, an athlete qualify, go to the games, and you talk about a crazy experience and not really knowing anything. I knew programming and had them ready to go, but once they got on the plane and went over to, it was in '92, when they went over there, they were at the hands of at the time it was a U.S. athlete, the U.S. coaching staff. And so I just tried to get up and catch it on TV and watch the rounds, and ended up working out really well as an athlete running on the 4x1 for USA. Go a few more years and in the coaching ranks at West Virginia, and especially had international kids who qualify. So it was a similar situation to where you programmed for them. The beginning of the season was, okay, what's your ultimate goal? And they wanted to represent their countries, and so the programming began from there. And then once the season was over, you kind of cut them loose. You gave them their program to go off to their training camp, and then same thing, you just kind of watched it from afar. 2012, had the opportunity to work for a university who understood the value of having the opportunity to go. And so I got a chance to go over to the games to watch my athlete compete, not be a part of the staff, but certainly to be able to, have a conversation or two and be in the venue and be around for a few days to experience what we experienced in London, which was, an amazing opportunity. And then to be named to and to smartly take advantage of an opportunity with Athletics Canada, and to be able to be a staff member now, and to be able to travel to world championships and Olympic games, and obviously with the culmination of 2016 being where we were, not only being an individual event coach of an athlete who things turned out pretty well, to being a team coach also, to where you're responsible for athletes at their peak. And as Glenroy spoke to, it was very interesting in that you wear a lot of different hats, and the conversations at times are different, not knowing the day in and day out, for months or years leading up to the games, and being entrusted with these athletes. I have an acronym that I won't use here on the website, but basically it's I've always charged myself to make sure that I don't mess them up. That's my job when I'm being a team member, and so that's having good, frank conversations and being realistic with what is transpiring in front of you, but being prepared for a lot of situations, and to try to alleviate a little bit of the stress of nonsensical things. There's a level of stress that I think the athletes that have qualified, all three of you can speak to. Some of them need that. They kind of thrive on it a little bit, and it's interesting to watch those things, and you can't make them too comfortable, honestly. And I found that out actually with an athlete. But you just try to regulate it as best you can. And so it's been an experience for me, as you say, Chris, from watching on TV and just dreaming about it to being in the stands at the ultimate time, at the ultimate moment. So it's been a wonderful experience, and one that we look forward to continuing on here in about a year from now.
Well, it's great, and it's really interesting to see that you've had that experience from all different ranges and had success from all different experiences, whether you've been in the stadium as a part of the team or watching from home. And it goes to show that you can get it done, you can be successful, in all those different contexts. So that's great. Hilary, over to you. Obviously, you haven't coached at the Olympic Games, but you've attended twice as an athlete. It'd be interesting for you to take us through your experience of attending the games as an athlete. Maybe talk a little bit about the differences between London and Rio. There's definitely a lot of them. And talk about just kind of the abilities you had to work with your coach at those two different games, and how the differences and what the differences were there.
Yeah, I had two very different experiences in London and Rio, and just even in my build up to making an Olympic Games was a long one. I had made every other championship except the Olympics leading into 2012, and I had been at two Olympic trials prior. I'd been at 04 and 08 and didn't make either. So when I made the 2012 London Games, I was super excited, obviously, and finally had achieved the first step in that. And there was a lot of hype in terms of the London Olympics in a positive way, and excitement. And I'd been to the UK and raced there quite a bit, and in Europe, and obviously it was in English, so there's a lot of familiarity with going into that. And in terms of my prep leading into London, it couldn't have gone better. I had 3 altitude camps, I had raced Diamond Leagues, I had raced all over the world that year. So leading in, all the things that I needed were there and were checked along the way. So I was very, very prepared, and my competition showed. I didn't make the final quite in the way that you want to make a final, but I eventually made the final in default by people testing positive. But anyway, I think that the experience couldn't have gone better for me in terms of the way that I executed my competition and the experience that I had in London. It was so positive, and I really felt like I embraced the experience, and I got personal best through every round, and competed very well. And I just was so excited to be there, but also so focused on the best competition I could have. And in Rio, it was quite different in my lead up. I had a baby in 2014, and then got injured trying to rush back to from having my son in 2015. And as a result of that, I wasn't carded and didn't have standards to get into races. So there were some challenges leading into 2016, in that if you don't have the times to back you up, you can't get into the diamond leagues or some of the fast races you need to qualify for the Olympics. And then I didn't have some funding that backed me up. And I don't want to act like I'm complaining, because I think we make choices, and I feel like, running and track and field has given me such an amazing experience. But just to counter the two different experiences going into Rio, I didn't know that I would be able to make it coming back from having a baby. So when I did qualify, that was the first step to getting back from that experience of coming back from pregnancy. And once I qualified for Rio, then things started to fall into place. My training started to fall into place. And I think I got the confidence back to say, okay, this is where I belong again. And 10 days before Rio, I got a personal best in a time trial. And so then I knew that I was ready to compete with the best in the world. The Rio games themselves, there were a lot more uncertainties, I'll say, going in than there were London, in terms of whether they'd be ready and some of the safety precautions and mosquitoes and all kinds of things. But I will say, when we got there, I didn't feel that those were that big a deal. And I think that that's important as an athlete, that you're in a bubble and you have to stay in your bubble and focus on what you can control, and you're there to compete. It doesn't really matter about the conditions, you have to deal with it. I mean, I was in Delhi for the Commonwealth Games, and those are similar worries and precautions, but it's the track's 400 meters and you stand on the line with the international competition that you've likely competed against all year. And so that's how it went. And so each of those games had different experiences for me. My London Olympic experience for all rounds is I couldn't even hear my competitors next to me talking. It was so loud. There were so many people in the stadium. In contrast, in Rio, the stadium was so empty in my first round that I could hear my coaches in the stands. So, but again, you focus and you have a job to do, and you get in there and you compete, and that's what we're there to do. So I think everybody's championship experiences are going to be different, and you have to deal with what the variables are and be ready to compete at every level in every situation. And so that's what I did.
That's great. And I know from your coaching dynamics at the time, in 2012, your coach was not on the team staff, so you would have had to work with a coach on the team staff, and then obviously liaise with your personal coach. Whereas then in 2016, your coach was on the personal staff. Did that play any role into it? Did that make any changes? Did it make anything more difficult or easy, or were you able to just adapt to that situation?
I think like by the time you get to, at least for me, I'm a pretty autonomous athlete, and felt like I knew what I needed to do. And so I don't think it necessarily changed anything. I was at lots of championships where I didn't even have a coach there, and the team coaches, they are all so experienced. And so, Jeff, Glenroy, everybody that's there, they can support you. It made the logistics a little bit more complicated in 2012 to meet my coach at the entrance and get day passes, and same with my husband. So that was more complicated, and it was a lot easier in Rio when both coaches were in the village. But and to have them at the warm-up track, it does give you a bit more comfort. But at the same time, you got to be ready for both situations. And I think now as a coach, I look at that and think, I want my athletes to be independent. I almost want to be obsolete by the time they get to that level, because if they're depending on me to tell them what to do or be in their ear, then we have a problem.
That's great. So in all of your kind of initial responses there, you did mention, while talking about the Olympics, you mentioned a lot of the other high level meets that you often attend along the way, whether that's a World Championships or Commonwealth Games or Diamond Leagues or anything like that. So as a coach, and we'll start with our coaches, so we'll look to Glenroy and Jeff to kind of head off on this one. How much are the Olympics just like any other high level meet? Maybe talk a bit of, go to Glenroy, I guess, and how do you prepare athletes, and how do you treat the Olympics just like any other high level meet, and draw on those past experiences?
Well, I think I'll say, and I'm certain Jeff can expand on this. In my mind, I think the Olympic Games, it's certainly not like every other meet, and the athlete and coach has to recognize that right off the top and realize that you are going to the Olympic Games. However, the manner in which you deal with the fact that you're at the Olympics is really what makes the biggest difference. And I think for a lot of athletes these days, competing at, and especially at our top end, a lot of the athletes that compete at Diamond Leagues throughout the summer and then off to World Championships, Olympic Games, it's an easier pathway for them. And in some areas, we've tried to expose athletes to Diamond Leagues just as a stepping stone to being ready to compete at the Olympic Games. Because once you get over the entire overlay, and Hilary alluded to this, it really then becomes still that the track is 400 meters, the long jump pits are where they are, pole vault is there. Athletes have to still compete the distances and the events that they've done countless other meets that are not the Olympics. So for me, a lot of times it's just trying to expose athletes to as close as you can get, but recognizing that you're never going to get to what the Olympic Games are unless you're at the Olympics. But keeping in mind that at the end of the day, it's the ability of the athlete to line up and perform on demand that really matters. And that you can see not just at the Olympics, you can see that in every other competition that they do in the lead up to the Olympic Games. So as long as they're prepared to do that and meet their competition head on, I feel that the Olympics itself, again, once you get past the overlay of the Olympic rings and what it means and the 4 years and the commitment and all the different things that people kind of drum up, and rightfully so, because I'm not undermining that or putting that to the side any. I think that that's all very important, and that's part of your preparation in that 4 years or 8 years in the lead up to those Olympic Games. That's all a part of your preparation, is to make sure that you're preparing for all these different things that you're going to confront.
That's great, Jeff. Anything to kind of add there? And like to your point, Glenroy, I mean, part of that question is how much is it like the Olympic Games and how much is it not? So Jeff, depends on how you want to go about answering that.
The opportunities really for people are different along the way, even that the question can be answered many different ways. I think part of the answer though is back to the comment that you're like, especially as a coaching member. So when we're on staff, you're trying to make it an easier opportunity for people to compete, to have the confidence to be able to move through. So your job again is to not mess them up. I think a lot of times it's you use a lot of whether it's whatever a Diamond League level might mean to you. It's Hilary alluded to the fact of there's times and distances and heights and things like that you have to get into those meets, but there's still high level meets that every athlete along their path, especially once they have qualified for the games, would have been at, and to use those as sounding boards, to use those as opportunities to reflect on that you're a lot more prepared than maybe you realize because of different things, and a lot of times maybe because of the failures that you had, quite frankly. And the conversations that you had with your coach afterwards. And I know I have made it a huge point to try to be at every high level meet that the athletes who are on the Olympic pathway can go to and qualify for, to be there and mainly to get to exactly what Hilary's point was, that by the time you get to the World Championships or the Olympic Games, if the conversations are very minimal, if there's not a whole lot going on, there's very little adjustments that are being made, you've done your job leading up to that. And so that's a big level and a big thought process that goes into the coaching side of it, as to try to make it as not anything different than another meet, even though it's completely different than any other meet that you'll go to.
All right, that's great. So Hilary, from the athlete perspective, how do you obviously you went to 2 games and a lot of other world championships. How did you find the Olympics themselves differentiate themselves from even a world championships or a Diamond League or some of the other high level meets?
I think that the Olympics is a big deal because it's a big goal. And so the way that it differs from, say, a world championship is the village experience and the major games. And so the FISU, Commonwealth Games, those championships would help prepare for an Olympics. So yeah, I think there are some different aspects. And then compared to a high level meet is the rounds and getting used to running rounds. But I will say, I think in Canada, we have great opportunities. Even in our high school system, we joke that OFSA is the world championships, but going through OFSA for me was such a good experience to get used to rounds, and then going, through university and NCAAs and getting through rounds. That experience of championship racing, even at our national championships, when you have to go into a call room and wait, that's stressful. But if you've done it before, that really does help, because if you have to warm up 2 hours before your race and you're not used to that, that's something you need to practice. So I would say to athletes who hadn't been before, you should practice in training. I remember Dee Cummins having us sit down at practice and wait 30 minutes after we had already warmed up before we started a time trial, just to get us ready. And I thought, man, this lady's a vet. This is good. So I think it is valuable to practice what you have to do and to understand some of the differences. And I'll just share one thing that really changed my perspective. In my first World Championships, I didn't make the final through the semis, and I was sitting there with one of my Eastern European competitors and a friend of mine, and I said, oh, well, I didn't make the final, but it's my first World Championships. And she turned around and looked at me and said, it's not your first competition. And I thought, yep, Eastern European, got it. But really good advice. It's not your first competition. So you really do have to put that into perspective and maybe not, I don't want to say make excuses, but give yourself a chance and try to set goals along the way like you were at all the previous competitions.
That's great. I'm interested in looking at, like, what are some of the things that we can do. And I know, Hilary, you kind of touched on it there with the idea of going through call rooms in practice to kind of help go through that process and what that's like, leading up to the Olympic Games. And Glenroy, I think you touched on it quickly as well, so I'll come back to you on it. Is there things that we do, as coaches, or as personal coaches to athletes, that they can do to try to prepare their athletes for the Olympic Games, maybe in that quad leading up to the Olympic Games? Things like, is there certain competitions that I think you mentioned, if you can try to get an athlete into a diamond, that's a great opportunity. Are there other competitions? Hilary mentions, OFSA, but maybe it's Canada Summer Games, maybe it's FISU Games, those opportunities to get into similar like competitions to give athletes that experience. Is that something that you have in your mind that you'd like to see our coaches and athletes try to do?
Yeah, and I think for the most part, our coaches do that. And I think they recognize that wherever the athlete is, when you're at your home track, you've got to expand that a little bit and gradually make that bigger and bigger. I mentioned, obviously, Diamond League competition, and I was speaking primarily regarding for example, our relay program, and allowing some of the athletes to run relays at the London Diamond League. Something like that those things have made a huge difference in the ability of our men's, specifically our men's 4x1, to be able to go to the Olympic Games and compete. Because in the past, what has happened is a lot of times you might have 3 of those guys that are running open races. The other 3 are waiting for the relay to come around, which should come around in another week to 10 days. And by sitting around and not having been to the track, been through the procedure, they're not aware of what they're about to get into. But if you go to a Diamond League, you compete with some of the best teams in the world, a month outside of the Olympic Games or the World Championships, I think that better prepares you for what's going to happen at the World Champs or the Olympics. So I believe that the more you can expose your athlete to different competitions, higher level competition, of course, it has to be within the athlete's capacity as well. You don't want to take someone to a meet that they're just simply not ready to compete at a level where it does more harm than good. So it's recognizing those little nuances that needs to happen for your athlete, and recognizing where your athlete is, and even for the coach's own understanding of what's required at some of these meets, and making sure that the pathway that athlete is going to take to get to those major championships.
I can't hear you.
Got to come off mute, otherwise I'm just chatting to myself. Jeff, I was going to take this next question over to you, and the question's around, whether athletes can excel at their first Olympic Games. And I know sometimes there's a discussion around, that first Olympic Games for some athletes is just an opportunity to get that experience, to be wowed by the ceremonies and the rings and all that sort of stuff. But in your experience, do you think it's also possible for athletes to go on and achieve success? And talk a bit about that, and what are some of the things that we're playing against them versus, why maybe it's even an asset for it to be the first Games.
Interesting. And I would probably answer it based on the age of the athlete when they qualified for those games, quite frankly. I think the younger ones would just be pretty malleable, and if they've had a high level of success in their competitions leading up to that, to be able to go in and maybe just not even realize the gravity of the situation. And so it's speaking to the two in particular, very young. They were both, so Derek and James were both juniors when they qualified and went to their games. Both very high level athletes, and when they stepped on the track, they were the man, really, honestly, in their events. And when they both got to the games, there was an ease to both of them. And I think also to be frank, Derek and I didn't talk about medaling in 2012. I mean, it was, get into finals. That would have been awesome, especially after coming off his surgery a year before and things like that. And the same thing with James running 4x1 rounds back in the day when you had to run 4 times, I think it was, to get into the finals, 3 times and then the finals. But I could see a more developed athlete having maybe a more difficult time with that, and having to that would need a much more developed conversation, I think, and something to be able to get them to understand. I watch it. I'm very fortunate to be able to travel the world with a lot of these athletes, and for me, a big part, whether it's high-level university athletics or just the international competitions, you watch the athletes go through the rounds, or they go through the first few bars, to speak high jump specifically, pole vault, and high jump and long jump, I think you see it more often, to where it's like, yeah, okay, I'm good at these bars, I'm good at this distance, these first couple jumps, but then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm going to go for it now, kind of a deal, and forgetting what got you there, and to understand that there's a level of composure that you need to be able to succeed at a level. A great mentor of mine spoke very often when we would go to championships, the fact that more times than not, you didn't really necessarily need to set a PB to get to a finals or to even place. You needed to be, consistent. You needed to be around that, probably. If you were prepared, you could go into it and maybe pull off a personal best. But the majority of it is, a lot of people around you are going to put pressure on themselves, and I could see a more mature athlete trying to do that, maybe thinking this is the last opportunity I've got, and then trying too hard and missing out, even though they were really prepared going into it. So I haven't been on really basically both sides of it. I know the conversation that I would have again with a more mature athlete would be that of you're here, you qualified, you're one of the best, you've been out there, and to not lose yourself, especially once it starts to get super competitive towards the end there, and now you're top 8 and you're looking around, you shouldn't to not be overly focused on everybody else. Just control what you can control with what you're doing, and more times than not, it's served very well for them.
Glenroy, do you have anything to kind of mention to that when you're in your role now as the head coach? Do you approach a first-time athlete at the games a little differently than someone that's been there 2-3 times possibly?
Not necessarily. I think generally, obviously, if the coach is on site, or if they're in close communication with their coach, obviously, if it's an athlete's first Olympic Games, major championships, you just want to make sure that they understand what your role is, what the role of the coaches are, what the role of the IST people, and just make them as comfortable as you possibly can. Obviously, you know, our communication to the athlete and to the coaches in the lead up is around performance. So I don't think you necessarily have to hit them over the head with that anymore, but just recognizing that they may not know the full lay of the land at the Olympics. So making sure that they have that kind of orientation done and they know where they're supposed to be. With our coaches now on the ground, our coaches are very, they're hands-on, obviously, for most of the athletes, and they're the veteran athletes. You don't necessarily need to be as hands-on with them, but there's still some of them that, you know, will forget things from time to time. So the coach's job really is to make sure that you're thinking about not only the things that the athlete is also supposed to be thinking about and you know that they're responsible for, you're also going to be responsible for that. So it's a second layer in making sure that the athlete experience at the games is a positive one, but also one that bears some good high performance results.
So Hilary, I'm interested from an athlete's perspective, what did it feel like emotionally going back to the games a second time, and how did you feel maybe in a certain way better prepared that way? I know the situation was different, coming back from having a child, so performancely you might have been in a different spot, but mentally, did you find you were more comfortable, or did it feel like was the second time feeling like you're still going for the first time?
I think because the situations were different, I did feel a little bit different. I was more comfortable in the setting, and in that I had been there many times in that high level setting. In London, I remember vividly having a moment, the one like freak out moment, like I'm at the Olympics. And I was just laying in the tent before warming up with my feet up, and all of a sudden, like, you know, rush of emotions, I'm at the Olympics. But after that, it was fine. And then going into Rio, I never had those moments. But what I was missing in Rio that I had in London was that I had raced so much that year. So I didn't have as much confidence around racing, that race intuition. And I think that what Glenroy said about getting into that race competition isn't just the case for, you know, your whole career. I think in the year I found it to be so important, because leading into London, I didn't even have to think. My race intuition was just there because I had raced leading up to the games so much, and I just could react and didn't have to think about it. Whereas in Rio, I hadn't had that exposure because I couldn't get into meets, or you know, I had a child at home and wasn't traveling as much. So when I got to the games, I hadn't had the race exposure. And I do think that that affected me in the competition. But in terms of my calmness being there, I was very excited to be there and ready to get on the line. But I do think that race exposure, especially in the 1500, that's very tactical, and you have to react to various situations. You could have a PB race, you could have a super slow race, and you kind of have to be ready for that. So yeah, those are definitely differences.
Great. I'm interested talking a bit about goal setting, you know, around the Olympic Games specifically. Obviously, every athlete, when they come to the games, their context is a little bit different. You've got athletes like Derek in 2016, who's, you know, vying for a medal and potentially, you know, a gold medal. You got other athletes that are, you know, quote unquote, just happy to be there. So how do you, as coaches on the teams, let's talk specifically about being a staff coach, how do you work through those process goals with the athletes to ensure that they are getting the most out of them at the Olympic Games, rather than just being, you know, happy to be there? I don't know if Glenroy, you want to start off on that and talk a bit about that?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is done in the lead up. And as coaches on the ground, I don't know how much involvement, unless you're the personal coach, you have in the goal setting for those athletes. It's certainly, I know, just even working with our relay program specifically, you know, our goal obviously when going to any of these major championships is to get into the final, and then once we're in the final, we're trying to get on the podium. So it is always about trying to better whatever our performance coming into the championships were. And I think that a lot of coaches with their athletes. It's hard to say. I think that Jeff would probably be able to answer this one, and even Hilary a little better in terms of her role as an athlete, as well as Jeff has coached obviously quite a few athletes that perform quite well at major championships, and whether there is a specific goal setting mentality going into the competition, or if it's just kind of, let's see how things come together when the athlete is fit and ready to go.
I know, speaking in reference to being on a staff, a lot of, again, what I've tried to do is as staff members, we've been instructed by our director and the head coach to have as many, to have an open line of communications before the games and the major championships with the athlete and with the personal coach, so that not only to have the workouts when you go to and you're spending 10, maybe 12 days at a training camp before you even get to the major competition, but also to have spoke once or twice about what the overall, what was the ultimate goal, what was the not necessarily the process, but what are you hoping to achieve as we go into this. I've been really fortunate, as I'm trying to rack my brain a little bit, as to the groups that I've been in a really fortunate time with Athletics Canada and the athletes and the teams that I've been able to be on, in that I'm struggling to find people who are happy to be there, to be quite honest. I really, as I watched practices, and there were numerous times when you get it done with the field event practice, and the athletes, you can only jump so many times and things like that. So to stick around and watch a distance workout, or to watch some hurdle process and things like that, the majority of those athletes were thinking about what the mantra, I guess, is the best way to describe it, is of, if you're a field eventer, you're trying to be top 12. If you're, you're a runner, you're trying to be a finalist. And then from there, the conversations are fun. And I think that's where it scales back again to then being prepared to have those conversations with the athletes of, as a personal coach, if you're prepared to not talk to them a whole lot, you're in a good situation. They're ready to go, and they're going to give their best their best effort. And sometimes it's fourth, sometimes it's seventh, sometimes it's first. But you made the big step in making it to the finals. And then having those opportunities to have the conversations and to keep things a little bit more realistic, I think, is the best way to describe it. Going into, if say the personal coach isn't going to be there, and then you can kind of speak their ease. You can make comments that are similar to what you would have heard those 2 month and a half leading up to it of what I know. I sit down with the athletes individually, and I just ask them flat out. I was like, listen, in all these practice sessions, give me a comment or two that your coach would say, give me a cue. And because then to be able to make that relatable and to have them, even for a flash of a second, field events are so much different, where you do have the opportunity to discuss, a good or a bad effort with the athlete pretty much every time. But to use their speak, not mine, not anything that I'm coming up with on the fly, on the moment. And I think, again, Commonwealth, Pan Am Games in particular, NACAC, those championships, to where it's really been an opportunity where a coach maybe can't travel with the athlete, and so you've really had to work, and that has always seemed to put the group that I've been fortunate enough to work with at ease, and allowed them then to just do their thing, and I got them there on time. As Glenroy can attest, our job was to get them across that walkway, get them in the call room on time. You go and find your area to sit down. You have as much, or you have as little, honestly, as little conversation as possible with them. And that even goes along with not too much rah-rah, to be quite frank. I'm a big believer in keeping an athlete at about a 7 or an 8. You get on that scale of you're already at these major games or whatever it might be. And so everything's buzzing, everything's at a 10. And the mistake I see a lot of times is watching other athletes. Okay, now I'm going for it. Now I'm at 11. Now I'm at a 12. And it's like, you're you can just watch it happen, and it's a shame when it does. But to be able to get to talk to them about that, of being in that position to where you can really allow yourself to do the best that you can be at that moment is what a major focus is, especially as a staff coach.
That's great. Yeah, some really good insights there. Hilary, I wonder, just from the athlete perspective here, just talking a bit about your own, process goals and how you went about setting goals for something as big as the Olympic Games, and how much time did you spend thinking about things like medals or finals or that, or was it more just breaking it down into a normal race and thinking about the process goals that go into any race, whether it's the Olympic Games or otherwise?
Yeah, for me, it was just not getting too caught up in everything around me. The public understands medals, and you hear a lot about that, and the media asks questions about that. And so I think it's important to almost dim it down into your own light. And for me, it was about making the final and focusing on round by round as well, because in the distance events, because they're tactical, you can run a race feeling like you've barely run, because it's all about the last 400 meters. And sometimes that can be disappointing if you don't move on. Well, for sure it's disappointing if you don't move on, because you've come all that way and you didn't run a personal best and you didn't get through because it was a slow race. So I think you have to take it round by round. And even if you hear the medalists in interviews afterwards, they're doing the same thing. They're not thinking about the medal in the first round. They're thinking about getting through the first round. So it is very crucial to take it step by step and not get caught up. I'm getting an echo. Are you getting an echo?
We'll just go on mute and make sure that we're okay there, but should be fine.
Okay. Yeah, so not getting too caught up in the media and others' expectations, and knowing what you can do, and maybe having a few different goals of not having PBs in mind as the only goal. For me, it was achieving, getting through the rounds and then getting on to the final.
That's great. Kind of moving on and talking a little bit about the idea of what's like the Olympic letdown, and that's for athletes that won the gold medal, or for athletes at any level at the games. It's such a big push. It's a 4-year, or in this case coming up a 5-year process to get to those Olympic Games, and then for some it's the culmination of a career and they decide to move on after that. For others it's about regrouping and moving ahead to the next year or the next quadrennial. I wonder, just from all of your different experiences here, whether that's something you look to try to manage actively, or how you go about just managing that. And I'm actually really curious from Jeff, your standpoint, especially with Derek, who won an Olympic gold medal. What did that look like? What did that next month or 2 months or 6 months look like? Yeah.
Sorry, a little technical difficulty there, dealing with it. But as personal coaches, a lot of us, even I know the athletes journal, but I've got all the old workouts, and I'm a old school guy, pen and paper, and so I've got it's funny, every now and again I'll go back to revisit what worked, what didn't work, what notes I had maybe jotted down on my in my notepad. And after the games, in particular in Rio, I remember we got on a plane to finish up the Diamond League season, and it's always interesting as a coach too. You can watch athletes, and you kind of know when their season's done when they exhale. And so you go to you have a lead up to the games, which Derek's actually wasn't the best. 16 wasn't really a great season with his back being sore and the issues that he had there. But we found our stride. He found his stride right there at the end. Gave him a lot of confidence going into it. Competed really well. Even at the games, I know that when he knew it was one, you can kind of see the athletes, and like I said, it's whether it's a philosophical or it's an actual physical exhale, to have an opportunity to know when the season's done. But to I think a good way to explain it, in 15, after winning obviously it was, you know, you knew the different pressures now of what 16 was going to be about and the thought process. And, you know, if you had won there and medaled there, the opportunity is certainly in front of you to go ahead and do that in 16. So in 15, compete a little bit more, take your normal 3-4 weeks, and then just get back at work really, and try to keep things as basic and as simple as possible. We've really never really deviated that much from a lot of good. We found a pretty good system early on, if you will. 16, the next morning, I believe it was, in a car to go and get interviewed by Scott, and the very first, maybe the second question, you know, the first question was, how does this feel? And the second question was, so, you know, you're going to stay on for Tokyo. And you almost feel like it's interesting to watch athletes. You hope they don't get kind of badgered into it kind of more than anything, right? But I know, you know, that was my first opportunity here, that he was excited and looking forward to competing through 2020. Because honestly, we hadn't talked about it. It was like, let's get through 16 and, you know, see where we're at from there. But, you know, then after that, it was, you take your break and you get back at it. But sorry, we had that one Diamond League meet, and I remember even warming up, it wasn't the same person. And so I could tell you that at the games, and you have that level of a moment, that's probably the best opportunity to pack it up, go home, and it's like, okay, let's get, you know, ready for next year, kind of a deal, if that is something that you want to do. But I don't know if that exactly addressed the question.
Yeah, interesting, Glenroy. Just slightly different take. Like, I wonder from like a programming perspective with your athletes on a, you know, individual level, do you program differently after the Olympic Games? Is there a longer, you know, break period? And if it's normally it's 1 month, is it 2 months? Is there anything else that you kind of would incorporate into the training plan that would change after the Olympic Games?
Yeah, I would think that obviously that would be based on the athlete's like maturity and training history and those type of things. Typically, it's anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. It depends really. You get an athlete, I would think that you're performing at a really high level, and based on what the plans are for the following year, if it may mean that the athlete wins a medal and then they're done, or they might be thinking, just like Jeff just mentioned, you know, looking at another 4 years to compete in Tokyo, and then the plan itself could be completely different, right? So I say 4 to 6 weeks as a downtime is typical in most cases. Again, based on the athlete's training history and those type of things. I know, like when I competed, it was really just that. It was nothing longer than 4 to 6 weeks. So it's the same principles I would use with athletes that I work with.
Hilary, I'm interested. Did you notice yourself, motivation wise, was it more challenging, you know, after an Olympic Games versus the World Championships or any other year in terms of getting back up and getting motivated again? Did you find that washout period longer? Did the fall suffer at all as a result? Or maybe not. Maybe you were.
Yeah, it depended. I've had both. I remember, I think the Commonwealth Games in 2006 in Melbourne was my first major championship, and it was like one of the most amazing championships. So after that, I remember a huge letdown, and I wasn't ready for it. I was like depressed for a month, and that surprised me. And so I think after that, I recognized and had conversations with my coach, and to know that could happen. And so I think there's like the mental and the physical, like Jeff alluded to as well. So in other years, I remember just being burnt out after a couple weeks of trying to get races after a championship and realizing I'm done. Like, you just can't do anything about it, because you do get unfit by racing. Like, you're just not training, and so you're running out of fitness and you're running out of sharpness, and so you get to a point where you get in a race and you just don't have it anymore. And I remember being at a Brussels Diamond League in September, after a world championship, and I just had no pop. And I thought, okay, now it's time to call it. So I think you as an athlete know when that's gone, and that can be emotional or it can be physical or both. And yeah, it does happen, and it's time for a break. And even though as distance athletes, we don't really like taking time off, you gotta get unfit to then regenerate and emotionally and physically rebuild.
Great. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I've been monitoring to see if there's questions coming in. So if there is any last questions, feel free to shoot them over and we'll try to get to them. So kind of looking at this last question I had here, unless there is anything else that does come in, is just kind of looking at tips for any of our young or developing coaches that are working their way up in the sport, and they may have a goal of coaching athletes to the Olympic Games, or possibly being a coach on the staff of a team at an Olympic Games. And I know, Glenroy, you mentioned earlier the role of mentors, but also maybe the role of coach education or professional development. But what would be some tips you may pass along to those developing coaches, and if they do have goals of kind of coaching at that level?
Yeah, I would certainly say mentors are a huge piece. It was big in my development as a coach. I just got around coaches and individuals that are way smarter than I am, and have a knack for not just your coaching knowledge, but the way you deal with people, the way you handle various situations, the way you present yourself. And again, a lot of that can come from shadowing or having a mentor that you can go to problem solve some of the issues that you may have coaching. I'm a big believer, obviously, in coaching education and the need to kind of upgrade yourself as a coach, and not just, I mean, there's the science, of course, is important, but there's also the art of coaching, right? So like learning all the various facets of how to become a better coach, and how to deal with different athletes, because again, at the end of the day, there isn't one model of an athlete that you're going to deal with. So you're going to constantly be challenged, and you're going to have to rise to those challenges. So how do you do that? Expose yourself to as many situations as you possibly can to become better at your craft. That's really my recommendation, I think, for coaches. And then just, keep putting your name in. If you want to work with a junior team, you want to obviously start at a level where you feel that you can be more impactful, and work your way up. I think in our system, obviously, there's a lot of opportunity for coaches, again, to contribute to the Canadian system and the Canadian program, from the grassroots all the way up to the Olympic Games.
That's great. Jeff, do you have any other kind of ideas, suggestions, or?
Obviously, coming at it from a different angle, with being having coached in the States for so many years, but the process of it, and to be able to be, I guess maybe even the word would be humble early on, of taking opportunities. That mine was a graduate assistantship. I got school paid for, but that was it. I mean, I think it was something crazy. It was like $250 a month stipend, and my school was paid for. And yet it was, I had the opportunity to work with an initial group, but that grew very quickly. The coach just gave me an opportunity to spend more time with different avenues and different levels of kids. But you alluded to it really, Chris, in the initial comment and the initial bio. I'm a physical educator at heart. I'm a teacher at heart, and so it doesn't mean that you have to be just teacher based, but at the same time, I think that aspect you can kind of figure out the science, and you can get ideas and philosophies and directions that you believe in. But to be a teacher at heart, to be able to understand the process of learning, to be able to get into those athletes' heads, as Glenroy said, there are no two alike. Physically, mentally, emotionally, anything. So to be able to have to break it down that way. And I know a lot of times if an athlete wasn't doing well, I took it personally. I was doing something wrong. I needed to change. It wasn't their fault. It never was their fault. I wasn't getting to them for some reason. And so I would go back to, and you stand in a different spot. You talk to them longer, shorter, whatever it might be. The cues are more, the cues are less, and you just keep struggling, or not struggling. Well, yeah, it's a struggle while you're doing it, but to just keep working and keep teaching. And so on the coaching side of it, what do you have to do? You got to learn, right? And so to be able to read up on, there's just so many good basic principled books that are out there. One of the ones I go back to this day, Brett McFarland, and hurdling philosophies and things like that are just old school that you can also then adapt to new age philosophies, but to teach. And so that's it's at my core, and it's the great ones out there that I watch. That's what they do, and they don't give up. They figure out ways, and they take it upon themselves that they're the ones that have kind of somehow gotten in the way or slowed the process. And so they take it on their shoulders to fix it, not to point fingers and oh, they're just not listening to me or anything like that. So
great. We got Hilary, not to skip over you there, but we did have a couple quick questions come in from the audience, so I wouldn't mind just kind of maybe rapid fire getting through them as quickly as we can here. This one specifically: Glenroy, an athlete, has had a subpar performance at the Olympics. How much time after the event has been completed would you give before you approach them? That's probably a time.
That's a great question, because I think it's again, depending on the individual that you're dealing with. And again, what I try to do is I try to learn as much about the person and before approaching them. There are some people that you can approach once they're back out on the warm-up track, they're able to get some of their cool down in, and they're kind of just shrugging it off. You can approach them. There are other athletes that you really probably need to leave them alone for a little while until they're ready to talk. So again, that's one of those things that I think it's really based on the individual and how well you know the individual, and then how that individual's process works when it comes to these type of things. Because some athletes they come out after not doing what they felt they were capable of doing, and they just blow it off, and they're ready to talk to just about anybody. Others, they don't want you anywhere around them for about 24 hours. And then after that, they'll, once they've had a chance to get back to the village, or they had a chance to get to sleep, talk to their family, talk to their loved ones, the next day they might be open to having a conversation. And you have to be able to read the play as a coach.
And it probably also, I'm going to guess, depends. If they got another event 24 hours later, you might need to talk to them sooner. And
that's exactly. But then again, if they've got another event, a lot of times these athletes, you probably don't want to have anything to say yet. You probably want to wait until it's all over, because again, they're not going to be in a position to have a conversation with you, because they flipped the script and they're moving on to the next event.
Yeah, it's great. Another question here is do personal coaches have any of that physical or emotional letdown after a major championships? Maybe Jeff, what was your experience like?
Absolutely. And when you get as vested in it as we are, obviously you're not out there, during the competition, but it's the year-long emotional aspect and concentration and focus on what's going on, and the adjustments that you need to make as the season progresses. There's very few times that you're comfortable in a good way, and that there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, definitely. I think most people who know me would appreciate the fact that I've always valued a work-life balance, and I've never been apologetic about it. And it's something else. Again, I think it's served me fairly well. I look up to realize I've been coaching for 30 years now, and it blows my mind. And I'm no less energetic now than I was when I first started out. But a lot of that is it's not just, I think we would kid ourselves if you think you could get yourself together in 3 to 5 weeks, after season's done. It's just not the way it works when you've got the rest of your life going on around you also. And so it's taking the time during the season to make sure that you're doing things right. And it may be a 3 or 4 day break. And I've done it where I've left, and Derek will be the first one to tell you, like, we even do it sometimes before a major championship, before we go to a camp, where we're away from each other for 3 or 4 days. By then the athlete has a pretty good idea as to where we're at. And there's, as Hilary alluded to, you're not training as much then anyways. You're just getting fit, or sorry, you're already fit. You're just really kind of narrowing in on things. And so then those 3 or 4 days allow me to be ready for the 2 to 3 week haul that we'll have when we're off at those major championships. Taking the time afterwards, after a season, taking the holidays and enjoying them. So it's on a philosophical soapbox here, I think for a lot of young coaches, I watch them grind, and you love the enthusiasm and you love the energy, but there's a reality to it, and you have to appreciate the fact of how do you make it 30, 35 years in a program. And I think and enjoy the majority of them. That's the best way to kind of describe to be able to do that. And I can say firsthand, and work for an organization right now where it's stressed on us and on a very regular basis, which I completely appreciate and respect and value, because it's again, it's something that served me very well over all these years.
That's great. Well, I think we could probably chat, for another couple hours on this, but looking at the time, we've gone over our hour. Sorry to those questions we didn't get to, but that's just sometimes the case here. So I just want to say thanks to Glenroy, Jeff, and Hilary. I appreciate you guys taking your time. I'm sure everyone on the panel would say that as well. Reminder that everything was recorded today, and it will be posted to the Athletics Canada website under their e-learning tab. And hopefully look forward to having you guys at future webinars. I know we've got another one next week. So thank you again to our panelists, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.